All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, October 28th, 2024. I've got 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Before we start, I see we have many of our graduates from the Gahanna Citizens Academy. This 6-week-long program culminated this evening with a graduation ceremony just a few minutes ago, and on behalf of my colleagues and I would just like to thank you for your willingness to participate and congratulate you on the graduation. For my day job, I've been fortunate enough to work at the city, county, state, and federal levels, and I believe wholeheartedly that local government is often the most misunderstood and least well known, and so I would applaud your participation as a first step towards bridging that gap between the decisions and the work that goes on here at City Hall and the impact that our residents feel in their day-to-day lives. And so I would just say that while the course is over, you have homework. Reach out to your neighbors, reach out to our fellow residents, continue to remain engaged, and thank you very much for your willingness to participate. That said, we'll go ahead and get started with our agenda. First up, items from Council Office. We have a joint resolution and proclamation designating November 2024 as Native American Heritage Month in the city of Gahanna. And for this item, we will turn to President Bowers.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Weaver. So we have a draft resolution that thank you to Jessica Hiltz, our management analyst, and I believe that she has worked with Jen McBroom with the mayor's office as well. Any edits or revisions are welcome. We wanted to make sure that we specifically called attention to the rich heritage that we share with Native peoples, which is called out here in this resolution proclamation. Especially as we commemorated the 175th anniversary, we wanted to make sure that we were recognizing the significant role that Indigenous people have had on our shared history. As far as potential outreach or presentation, there is a member of ODNR. His name is Talon Silverhorn. He has been the point person on prehistoric Native American burial mounds in Ohio and is also a descendant of the Shawnee tribe. So we have made contact out to ODNR to see if Mr. Silverhorn would be available to present this resolution to and give us some context around the history and context of Native cultures and their impact here in Gahanna. So happy to take any comments now or prior to adopting this resolution on November 4th.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Any discussion? Seeing none, is consent for this item okay? All right, on the consent agenda, please, next week. Next up, we have items from the Department of Parks and Recreation, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into agreement with Pod Design for Academy Park improvements. Good evening, Director.
Good evening, and thank you. The Academy Park Improvement Project includes improvements of multiple features, which include the parking lot, the playground, as well as a trailhead. The trailhead will serve both the newly constructed mountain bike trail as well as the Big Walnut Trail. And that was funded in part by a NatureWorks grant that was awarded in 2023. Through a request for proposal process, Pod Design was selected as the firm in order to develop the design as well as the construction documents for these improvements. Through the planning efforts as well as the evaluation of the site, it's determined that expanding the parking lot into an additional 85 spaces is an achievable feat. We also have the opportunity in order to improve both the shelter house as well as the trailhead to incorporate that into one site in reflection, instead of having two different sites. So instead of having a trailhead separate from a shelter house, combining into one feature is both a cost savings as well as an improvement to the site in response to the program. With that, administration is seeking an ordinance to amend the pod design contract for a total sum of $298,860. The procurement policy requires council action because it exceeds the threshold of $250,000. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Director. Any discussion of this item? Mrs. McGregor?
Where are they going to put 80? I mean, that field, that park is used, every space is used for athletic fields. Where are they going to put 85 more spaces?
So there is a open green space. We're not going to impede on the actual space, the athletic space. So if you, outside of the baseball diamond and soccer field, that's where the additional spaces would be gained. So it was an expansion of the existing parking lot. So it's not adding additional site into the where the playground and shelter house is. It's ultimately where the soccer field green space is.
But they use that field all the time.
And the soccer field would remain. There's enough space there to add additional spaces without impeding on the soccer site.
Okay. I guess I just see that so much used. I'd hate to just, do they really need that much space for just the regular ball games?
We do. So even today, without adding another amenity, we have challenges with having an appropriate amount of parking spaces. So even on a site for just practice, there's quite a bit of competition. And now that we're adding a mountain bike trail, which is another feature, we see the potential for expanded need for more parking spaces.
Go.
Mr. Renner?
Oh, thank you. Director, thank you. It's sort of a dovetail a little bit with Nancy's question. I'm a little bit lost about where the 85 parking spaces are. And, could you provide us like a graphic or something? There's got to be certainly something that shows where those are.
We can do that. And it's the northern portion of the lot as you enter Academy Park. You'll to the west is where the additional spaces would be. But yes, happy to present a graphic in order to help identify that.
And are you saying that, so you're not going to touch the fields at all? It's just you're going to somehow mark it, so it's still going to be a pervious for rainwater and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be an asphalt top.
So it would be asphalt. My comments were that because of the amount of space that's available there, there's still opportunity and space for the soccer field to remain. We're able to add the additional parking spaces and have both the soccer field as well. So we're able to accomplish both without changing the intent of those soccer fields.
Okay. Is there a reason why, or were there alternatives to look at for gravel type, parking spot or anything like that?
So the review was done. We are in a lower lying area, and so there's no stormwater features, or there needs to be improved stormwater features there. So the approach of the asphalt lot was the best way for the sustainability of the longevity of the parking lot.
Okay. I still have concerns about that, so.
Okay.
Ms. Bowers?
Thank you, Director. I appreciate the effort undertaken because I know that there's certainly too few parking spaces when Academy Park is used at its capacity, right? Like we've all seen people parking on the raised tree lawn areas and then into grass. So we recognize that this is an issue. I think that there's a couple things here that I guess I would ask that we maybe consider or prioritize as we seek to accomplish that goal of adding spaces. And I think maybe you've heard that from a couple of my colleagues already. So, and I know that you're probably already exploring this, but just to hear it from a value set from council to ask that you consider this as you move forward with especially a large design contract. One, I think, certainly would be flooding management and stormwater mitigation in that area. And so with those fields not really having great drainage already, adding additional impermeable space could exacerbate that problem. And so if that could be encompassed in the RFP or in the process, I think that would be helpful if it's not already. Even up until the point of if that is recommended as a first step before adding additional parking space, it seems like that might be a precursor or a good predecessor to address some of that drainage issue as part of this project, as part of this scope of work.
And that is included in the scope of work.
Okay.
Because there was lack of that infrastructure at the onset, that needs to be incorporated into the design. So that is included in the scope of work for pod design.
Okay, excellent. And then I think part of that too, I'll echo, I would love to see permeable surface explored. I think that there are really sophisticated and perhaps even more cost-effective ways to look at doing that. That's not just gravel, but different types of pavers. I think that from how we manage downstream folks, particularly in Gahanna, especially since that's an upstream property, would really benefit from us potentially investing in permeable surface in that space. And then the other question I guess I have separate and apart from that would be, again, I think that there's a shared concern about not cannibalizing fields for spaces. So just making sure that, like, okay, if we maybe can get 40, that's a benefit. And so maybe 85 isn't necessary. But then the other piece of this is, and I guess a question, are we looking at doing any improved ventilation or upgrades to the bathrooms?
Yes, so, and that's the comments, and I didn't articulate that seamlessly, but with the improvements, adding the trailhead into the shelter house, that would be a full replacement of the shelter house, including the restroom facilities. Okay. So the trailhead and shelter house would then become one to an upgraded facility, updating and improving the entire asset rather than creating a completely separate building.
Okay, and forgive me if this is also included somewhere in our report, but has there been discussion about external AED access as well as part of this?
And that is actually moving forward sooner than this project is completed.
Okay.
But yes.
Okay, and so does that require electrical upgrades to the site too?
The full site would be completely upgraded with all new electrical, all new ADA access to both the, again, the facility as well as the playground.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Director.
Absolutely.
Any other, Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Thank you, Director. Happy to see this move forward. You know, being around the corner from Academy Park, we're there not just for the organized events, but leisurely quite a bit as well. And I think we all know that the parking lot is in dire need of refreshing or replacement. I want to go back to, so we appropriated some funds, of course, you know, for this project or for portions of the project. Can you, I was just flicking through the contract, can you please remind me, I guess, which other items are intended to be completed as part of this? I think we had talked about backstops and improved netting and potentially even some shade structures over by fields like 1 and 2, if I'm not mistaken.
So the netting as well as the shade structures are not part of the pod scope of work. It is included as an improvement to Academy Park, but that's through another vendor. Okay. So that's why it's not incorporated into this particular ask, because it's not incorporated into their design work.
Okay, that explains why I couldn't find it in the contract.
Yes.
Thank you.
That work is being done.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Is the will of council to have this come back to committee then, go on for first next week and then back to committee for any additional questions or comments, or?
I don't have any further.
Okay.
I'm speaking for myself.
I guess let me ask a question,
Yeah,
a follow-up question, just in terms of kind of process from here on out. Could you share with us a timeline of when this engineering kind of proposal, engineering plan would be completed, and then how that then would be reviewed either internally or in conjunction with council, and then make its way through the CIP process, I would anticipate?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, this project is incorporated into a larger project. The way that was included in the CIP was multiple different projects. The way we'd like to progress forward is to compile it into one. We, of course, want the construction contract to be more seamless. We're able to accomplish work. With that being said, and the work that needs to happen with the parking lot, we expect that the parking lot to take longer than the other improvements. We also want to see the improvements be accomplished within the park before we bring in equipment and large vehicles to tear up our new parking lot. So the assets within the park, that would be the playground as well as the shelter house, would be completed based off of funding, of course, through the year of 2025. And we anticipate the parking lot to be completed through the year of 26. From the engineering work or the design work would be completed through the end of this year into the first quarter of 2025. And we hope to go to bid in the beginning of second quarter of 2025.
Do you think it would be feasible to potentially share the design proposal then with council at the end of Q1 of 2025?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Mrs. McGregor.
Can it just go on, like, first reading and then not come back unless we have a question when we see the schematics?
Okay.
Of the parking? We could, that'd be okay.
All right, so on for first next week, and then we'll, barring an issue, it'll go on the regular agenda for the 18th then? Okay.
And that can just be emailed, the schematics could just be emailed.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director, appreciate it. Got that, Mr. Clerk? All right, thank you. Next up, we have items from the Department of Administrative Services. We have 2 items here. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. The first item is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into the joint self-insurance agreement with the Central Ohio Healthcare Consortium. The self-insurance agreement is a 3-year trust cycle, and it goes into effect on January 1st of 2025. So each entity that's a member of that consortium has to go before their legislative bodies to get authorization to sign that joint self-insurance agreement. It has been reviewed internally by us and the city attorney. We are requesting emergency on this to ensure that this can be signed in a timely manner to ensure health benefits continue without interruption into 2025 for employees. And for plan year 2025, the rates have been approved by the COHCC board, and Gahanna's rates will be increasing by 1%.
Okay, thank you, Director. Any discussion of this item? Okay. Seeing no discussion, on for consent on the 18th? Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Director. Next item, please.
The next item is a request for an ordinance to authorize the mayor to enter into contract with the Franklin County General Health District for 2025 public health services. So as you're aware, the city contracts with Franklin County Public Health to provide health services for the city of Gahanna and our residents. They provide services include administrative services, data services, environmental health, emergency preparedness, epidemiology, health promotion, health systems, planning, and many other things. So this is budgeted in the budget, and we do have appropriations for it. The 2025 contract represents a 1.4% increase over the 2020. The 25 represents a 1.4 increase over the 24 contract. We are requesting emergency with this contract as well to ensure signatures and continuation of services for the residents in the city.
Thank you, Director. Any discussion of this item? All right, seeing none, on for consent again on the 18th then, please. All right, thank you, Director. Next up, we have items from the city attorney. We have an ordinance amending City of Gahanna Codified Ordinances, Section 505.14, dangerous and vicious animals. City attorney.
Thank you. Before you, I have a suggested red line of our ordinance dealing with dangerous and vicious animals, specifically relating to a few typos that were in our code that could be meaningful if ever that specific section becomes an issue in a case, so that I do recommend some cleanup there. And then our code is absent the appeal mechanism for dangerous dog or vicious dog designations. So recommending putting in some mechanisms there that are consistent with state code. State code does require that all designations of dogs as dangerous or vicious be heard in a municipal court. So that would not be something that would go through mayor's court or anything locally, but all of those have to be heard in municipal court. So the right to notice and the right to have that hearing should be codified within our ordinance also. And then lastly, just to highlight, as I am reviewing this code, that our code defines nuisance dog as part of our definition for dangerous dog. So the menacing and provocation, without provocation, menacing attitude would be a dangerous dog under our code. So our code is more strict than state statute. Looking for any guidance or input if that needed to be changed to be consistent with state code or to keep it more restrictive in the city. I do believe that that would be an appropriate use of home rule for us to have a more restrictive code. So I don't believe that would lead us to any exposure or issues down the road. Also, just to note that I have been working closely with the police department on these revisions and red lines, specifically Chief Spence as well as Lieutenant Moffett. And this has also led to some review and modification of internal police protocol when issues come up with dogs that should be designated as dangerous. Whereas in the past, we used to refer these out to animal control. The department has made the decision now to do internal designations of dangerous and vicious under our code. So wanted to highlight that also. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, City Attorney. Any discussion from my colleagues? I see Ms. Jones.
Yeah. Who or how is an animal designated as vicious? Like, is that outlined
It
here?
is, so-
And I don't quite get the legal term of how you do that.
Yeah, so for vicious, it would be without provocation, the animal has killed or caused serious injury to any persons or another domesticated animal. Or without provocation has caused injury other than killing or serious injury to any person or has killed another domesticated animal. Let me make sure this.
Okay. And is that consistent with, is that part of our code more strict than the state, or just the highlighted, what you're saying?
Vicious animal is consistent with state code.
Okay.
Dangerous animal is more restrictive than state code.
Okay.
Because in the state code, they have a third lower category that we do not include as separate.
Could you explain the practical difference between, I believe it's a menacing animal versus a dangerous animal, so menacing in the state code versus dangerous, and like what that distinction would, the practical impact of that would be? If I'm using the right third tier.
Yes. So the third tier, which would be nuisance dog, under the state code, that would be a dog that has menaced or attempted to endanger a person. That they would be declared a nuisance dog, and only if that nuisance dog committed 3 other violations, for example, being at large or provoking another person, would it then become dangerous. So there are no separate requirements or obligations for the owner of a nuisance dog, other than you are on notice that if your nuisance dog is at large more than 3 times, it would be declared dangerous. So our code says if that dog is menacing or endangers a person but does not actually cause injury, that alone is enough to be dangerous. Was that clarifying enough?
Yeah, thank you so much. If there are no other questions, I'll weigh in on the question that you asked regarding kind of our instincts on this. So I'm keenly aware of the instances of dog attacks in other locations around the state, but also here in Gahanna. I'm also aware that it's incredibly taxing on law enforcement and on just the community to try to identify those multiple instances, and it often results in dogs that are capable of causing harm not being identified soon enough. And so those dogs are causing serious injury, serious fear, serious harm to others. And so from my perspective, I think that what we've had in place And what I would be in favor of continuing in place helps strike that balance to make sure that there is greater accountability, greater responsibility, and less burden on law enforcement to help prevent those instances of severe harm that we've seen across the state and here in our community. Thank you.
Mrs. McGregor?
Can we change that to 2 instances instead of 3? Can we lower that?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would say, create a category called nuisance dog, and then leave it to be 2 instances. Because under state code, there's a whole separate category for nuisance, and then it takes 3 strikes, basically, for it to become a dangerous dog. We go immediately to dangerous dog if they have a menacing act or...
Okay, that's what I was, and also, they have to pay a fee and register with this. How many dogs in Gahanna are registered as dangerous?
I do not have that information. I'm not sure. The chief says 2.
Okay.
2 dogs so far are registered.
Too many, but
So
okay.
to follow up on that, City Attorney, how does that designation come back to us? Because it gets communicated with the county by law enforcement, and I know the county maintains that
So-
list as well, because the animal has to be registered, and the license, they have to get a dangerous dog license. How does that come back? To ensure that the streams of communication are open and that all the appropriate parties have the right information for enforcement, how does that come back to us, I guess, is my...
Historically, when an incident occurs involving an animal that has attacked a person or another domesticated animal, that would be referred to Franklin County Animal Control. And they would be the ones to do an investigation and issue a designation, and that couldn't be contested or not, and then they would have to register with the county. They also simultaneously have an obligation to register their dog or animal as vicious or dangerous with the city. But as you are saying, the direct answer to your question is sometimes there is a gap there where there is not communication between Franklin County Animal Control and local agencies, so that we can't necessarily track whether this dog has been designated by the county as dangerous but not in the city. But the new policy directive with the department and the new code revisions would allow us to issue the designation locally as well. So we would still contact animal control and let them know that something happened, but we on our own would designate the dog as dangerous. We would have a paper trail there that we would follow up with to see what the outcome of any hearing is, that we would be prosecuting the hearing in Franklin County Municipal Court, and then having the dog registered locally. So it would be a easier, more safety nets and checks and balances in place on the local level for us to do the designation ourselves, which has been the direction we're going in now.
Thank you, that helps clarify. Appreciate it. Any other discussion of this item? Seeing none, is there a desire for this to come back to committee on the 12th? No? All right, so we'll go on for first on the 4th and then on the consent agenda for the 18th. All right. Thank you, City Attorney.
Thank you.
I believe that was all we had on the agenda for Committee of the Whole, barring anything. Seeing none, we will adjourn committee and turn things over to Chairman Snetcher for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Clerk, if you'll just give me the thumbs up when you're ready to go. All right, perfect. All right, with that, let's commence Finance Committee for October 28th, 2024. This is our first discussion meeting of the 2025 proposed budget. We're having a little different cadence this year, where instead of tackling the entire binder, breaking it up into various departments. So this evening, the intent of the discussion is to focus on human resources, information technology, finance department, as well as mayor's court. As in years past, I have a list of pre-submitted questions that were provided to me, then aggregated and submitted to the administration ahead of time, allowing them to kind of work through those responses for this evening. And I will just simply take them in order. when staff is giving me the nod that we're good to go. Unless you have some remarks that you have before we dive in.
We incorporated the questions in our PowerPoint.
Okay.
So if you'd like to list them off, we can. I'll just need a minute to get to the slide. So like some of the HR ones are in the HR department, and then like the general ones are up at the top, but we can take them in order. It's just that some of the questions were already pre-answered in the slide deck.
So you're cool if I read them in order? I might just take a minute to find the answer.
It's going to take a minute to find the answer because we have a 60-slide deck.
Mr. Schnetzer, I would recommend that we allow the presentation from the administration first, since this is coming to us kind of as first impression.
Sure. I'm fine with that. I'm just trying to think of how to make sure that these are all addressed. So will you guys highlight the question?
They're listed on the slide. You'll see them
perfect.
as
Okay.
you sent them.
All right, thank you. Then proceed.
Yep. So we're going to start this evening off with some of the general questions that were categorized in general government, and then the ones that are more department specific will be addressed in that specific department. But first, we're going to start the presentation. We received questions through council from a school board member, so Director Burry will address those questions that we received.
Yes, so there were two questions that came from the October 14th, 2024 minutes based on my presentation that evening on the 2025 budget. So these slides are to kind of address those questions, and I'll read them, and then how these slides address it. So the question was, on page 4 of the minutes, it states that the all fund projected revenue will increase by 10.2 million. Then on page 5, it states in the last sentence of paragraph 5 that general fund revenue will increase by 3.8 million. Given that general fund is the largest fund managed, where is the remaining 6.4 million of revenue going? So just to put this in context, this is slide 10 from that slide deck from the budget presentation. And this is referencing the 10.2 million. So this is for all 49 funds of the city. So the 10.2 million, as you could see, taking the total less the debt proceeds shows what that 10.2 million looks like for the 11% increase. On the next slide, so this references on page 5, this is the slide that I was speaking to, which was slide 12, which is just general fund revenue. So the general fund revenue is estimated to increase by 3.8 million or 11%. So to answer the question, the remaining 6.4 million is in all those other funds. That was part of that all funds slide. So that addresses the first question. The second question on page 7 of the minutes section titled Income Tax Calculation. Why is only 1.5% used in this calculation, even though the issue 12 1% is dispersed among dedicated funds? The dollars should be reflected as they are being collected and should be included as available dollars to spend. So again, on page 7, that was this slide that I was speaking to, which was slide 16, which again is just the general fund, which collects the 1.5%. Those same assumptions and calculations are used for the special revenue fund and capital fund also. So if you go to the next slide, this was slide 20 of my slide deck, which then addressed that 1%, the income tax for all 4 of those funds. So just that then answers those 2 questions that were passed along.
Thank you, Director. Senior Director Volman.
So the next slide we have is we were asked last meeting to bring the 2025 staffing request back with the 2026 projected, how much that would project out. So as you'll see on this chart, it has the priority 1s and 2s listed. It indicates how long those were budgeted for. So some of those are not budgeted for the full year due to time to hire. Some of the other ones, such as the facility superintendent, we don't anticipate needing someone on staff until this summer. So you can see what was actually budgeted. That gets you to 2025 number, and then the 2026 number is the projected, cost projected. That does include all employer-paid expenses, including health insurance and retirement. That also projects that we're hiring every single one of these employees at midpoint of the pay scale, and that typically is not actually a rate of pay that all employees get. But for budgeting purpose, we do use the midpoint of the unclassified ordinance. A lot of times, due to the structure of our pay plan and how it works, people come in this step. So the actual cost could be less than this. We also budget for family benefits, and not everybody takes family benefits. So these are just cost projections.
Thank you, Senior Director. Given that was a question from council, anything from my colleagues as a follow-up?
Can I just clarify? So the 2026 is full year,
That is correct.
and the 2025 is is the time to hire? Am I-
The 2025 is based on
I
when
mean,
we
20
want somebody on board, yeah, so.
Okay.
Whatever the budgeted amount says for, that's how many months it's budgeted for.
Okay.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? If I'm reading correctly, though, that priority 1 and priority 2 have been included in the budget, is that correct?
That is correct.
And just to clarify further on the interns line, is that the MORPC interns that we used this year?
Correct.
So,
Some of it is MORPC interns, some of it is not MORPC interns, and that includes the MORPC fee as well.
so that intern line, is that all new, or would that be if
That-
we continue to use MORPC interns? And does it aggregate all interns in that line?
Yes,
Okay, so some
Because-
of that's reflected already in 2024's budget.
correct.
Okay. I'm sorry, what were you going to say? Okay.
It's just some of the interns, if a department has specifically requested for a MORPC intern, we only budgeted for a MORPC intern.
Yep.
However, like HR's requested intern was for the spring semester to have somebody help with seasonal recruitment. So theirs was budgeted for 6 months, while like a MORPC intern's only budgeted for like the 10 weeks of the summer. So it depends on what department requested what intern, how it's budgeted for.
And the difference going from 2025 to 2026 for the interns, is that just an inflationary kind of 4%? Okay, all right, thank you.
Anything further from council on this slide? Director Vollmer, is that top line accurate? That math doesn't seem to check out. Is that one individual? So we have 7 months at 73,000.
I'm sorry, the communications technician too?
That's correct.
That is just a promotion. The request is to promote a communications technician 1 to a 2, so we have a shift lead. So I'm guessing the 2026 would be the full rate of the communications 2. That's how much, that can't be right. We'll have to check that, because I don't think that's not correct.
But the rest of them look fine, but that one's a fairly sizable jump. Okay. Anything further from council on this slide? All right.
So the next slide starts the questions that were asked in general government, and so Director Burry will proceed with these.
Thank you.
So the first one is from the transmittal letter. What percentage does revenue need to grow or expenditure growth need to slow in order for the 5-year projection chart to be in balance for the duration of the outlook? So just to clarify, it is a balanced outlook. We're not going in excess of planned resources, which planned resources are your revenue plus your unreserved fund balance. That chart is just looking at revenue itself for us to determine at what point are we going to need to potentially ask to use some of that unreserved fund balance. So it does reflect a balanced budget. With the current way that it stands, at the end of the 5-year period, we would still have about 7 months of unreserved fund balance estimated to be remaining, which is still 5 months higher than the 2-month minimum required by policy. What I did do, though, is every year that I run that, I run a couple different scenarios. The one that goes in the book is just from the main projection. But if revenue were to increase by 1% and expenditures were to decrease by 1%, then we'll be looking at 9 months of fund balance at the end of that 5-year period. And we wouldn't potentially be requesting to use fund balance until 2029. Anything additional on that one?
Well, I just want to make sure that, I guess I'll speak for myself, that I heard you correctly. So clearly there are some projections involved in that estimate or that chart, right, or that visual. You said it would, if revenue was 1% and expenditures were minus 1%, then there would essentially be no draw on fund balance, I believe, at the end of that projection period. I'm assuming what you intended to say was 1% more than the projected sort of base.
Right, so
outlook.
the
Okay.
base is the projection as it stands.
Yep.
And then assuming, okay, we're going to bring in 1% more revenue, and we're going to spend 1% less in expenditures,
Yep.
that when it kind of changes that
Got it.
dynamic of that 5-year.
Okay.
I also run it the other way, just to make sure that if we are looking a little lopsided, running it both ways, so we get 1% less revenue but have 1% more in expenditures. In all 3 scenarios, we're still balanced. It's just at what point are we going to have to request to use that unreserved fund balance?
Anything from council on that particular question? Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick clarifying question. So is that, in running the projections for this chart, is that the same percentages that were used in the previous question with the 25-26 hiring? Is it the same expected revenue and expenditures?
Correct. What you're seeing in the chart itself is what we're asking for, what we projected as far as the modeling and everything. And then I run those 2 other scenarios just to make sure that if we do happen to spend more, are we okay? If we don't bring in as much, are we okay? If we bring in more and spend less, we're obviously okay, but how much better does that make us? So kind of looking at those numbers in different lights, just to make sure that we'll look like we're solid for the next 5 years.
And just to put to finish off the point, that this projection takes into account all the priority 1
Correct.
and priority 2
Yes,
positions.
that is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything further from council on that question? All right, moving on.
Okay, next question is page 32 of the budget book. What is the driver behind the projected decline in local government fund revenue in 2025 and beyond? So under the chart, I gave some background for that. So as we're looking at the 2024 actual revenue coming in, we're probably not going to meet what our planned revenue was for the year. So when the state had their biennium budget for local government funds, they increased the percentage just a tick, but then they took what was historically general revenues, which is used as the base of the calculation, and called it something else. Like they moved that from general revenues and earmarked it for something else. So their goal was, well, if we give a percentage more, but then we divert all these general revenues to other purposes, everybody should be okay. Not quite. There was more revenue diverted than the percentage increase is covering. So we're probably going to be right about $1 million. For 2024, I had it projected $1,100,000, just because that little uptick was there, and we really weren't sure what that diversion of that general revenue was going to do to the calculation. Well, now I know. So it looks like it's decreasing us a little bit. So that's where I'm projecting for 2025 and 2029 to be very close to what I'm estimating we're going to end 2024 at that $1 million mark. And then we'll monitor the next biennium budget to see, are there any other changes? Are they restoring some of that general revenue to see if maybe that number needs to be either adjusted further down, or maybe we might see an increase depending on what they do in the next budget cycle.
Thank you, Director Burry. So in layman's terms, they're applying a slightly greater percentage to a smaller corpus of revenue.
Exactly.
Okay. Any questions from council on that particular item? All right, seeing none, please continue.
Next question, page 43. Please explain the estimated year-over-year decline in water fund revenue charges. So when I put those particular statements together, I combine the water and water capital, and I also combine the sewer and sewer capital into just one fund each, one water fund, one sewer fund. The water capital fund will fluctuate based on projects that are happening within the city. Certain projects require tap-ins or require a larger meter size because we're making changes to the infrastructure. When that happens, there are particular fees that get charged, and that goes into the water capital fund for the purpose of those fees. So that's why you kind of see some fluctuation there, and it's mainly because we have a lot of projects in 2024. They're not estimating as many in 2025. So it's really the water capital funds that are coming down there, and it's just based on project activity.
Thank you. Any questions from council on that item? All right, seeing none.
So this will be kind of Miranda and I are going to kind of hit on this a little bit. I'm going to talk about how things are kind of brought into the budget, and then she is going to talk about the other part of the question. So this is on page 73. How has employee turnover impacted 2024 expenditures, including vacancies or gaps between a departure and a new hire? And has this been factored into the 2025 budget request? So the answer is partially. So we can only budget for what we kind of know, and we're not always aware of when individuals are going to leave the city. So we do, for those that we know are leaving, we do plan on a succession for those positions. The projection also takes into account time to hire, number of positions requested, HR capacity. So that kind of explains why the 2025 budget includes partial funding for certain positions. We know this person's leaving in June. We're not going to plan a hire until July or August. And again, then taking into consideration time to hire with our HR capacity. So yes, those things that we know about are included.
Thank you. Anything further from council on that item? Ms. Bowers?
I believe we have one director vacancy at present. Yes, okay. Is there an anticipated hire date, or is there an expectation on what's happening with filling that role in terms of whether it's going to be continued to be filled by contract services or whether there's potential hiring happening?
We are recruiting for that position. It is somewhat challenging to be able to fill this role, given the fact that we've had 3 economic development directors over the last 4 years here. I do remain committed to fostering an environment where an economic development director can thrive. We have seen tremendous economic development success over the last 4 years. And we've had 3 tremendously highly skilled economic development directors in that role. And were specifically recruited and hired for that role. We have significant projects on the horizon that are going to require, I think, similarly skilled and experienced economic development directors. So making sure that we find somebody who's capable of handling the projects that we have coming down the pike and the challenges that we face here in the city is crucial to the success of that role. So we want to make sure that we are providing and ensuring a supportive environment that goes from the administrative staff to our council so that we can continue to attract businesses here and fill that economic development director role. I would have liked to have thought we would have had that filled by now. We don't. I'm still hoping that we have it filled by the end of the year because we do have significant projects right around the bend.
Has it been budgeted for a full year then for 2025?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further from council on that item? All right, seeing no more.
Okay. Next question here is from page 12. Please be prepared to discuss any new service mandates or major projects that are the main drivers of the personnel increases from 2022 actual to 2025 budget. So just from a financial perspective, 2022 to 2023 is when you're going to see most of that growth because that's when we were coming out of the pandemic. We were just off the heels of the Great Resignation. We had had a lot of positions that were left vacant in 2021 and 2022 while we were in recovery mode, trying to figure out when we were going to recover, if we were going to recover. So we didn't ask for a lot of positions at that point. At the end of 2022, we were pretty much recovered at that point when we were preparing the 2023 budget. So that's when we started to fill all those vacancies, asking for those new positions to be filled. As far as new positions, new services, Miranda's going to go ahead and address that part.
So part of the question was to ask about new services, mandates, or major budgets. So on the slide, up on the screen, you have some of the projects and priorities that necessitated some of the additional personnel increases. But like Director Burry said, during the pandemic in 2020 through 2021 and the first part of 2022, we held on all vacancies and only filled ones that were critical for the time being. So that's why there was a large increase in 2023 because those positions were budgeted and the new ones were budgeted as well. Happy to answer any questions about any items on there.
Anything from council on this particular question? So I have, I guess to Joanne's point, I guess is the trend that's depicted in this particular table primarily a function of the start date? Meaning if we were to extend that timeline further back to say 2019 pre-COVID, would that personnel count rise and then dip during 21 and 22?
Well, no, because, 2019, we had just gotten issue 1. We weren't doing anything because we were trying to get issue 1 or issue 12 passed. So at that point in time, you're not going to see this kind of going on because we were trying to get the levy passed. Once the levy did pass in 2019, 2020 was when we sat down and started to look at all of our departments and realize how anemic we were in a lot of those departments, trying to get things done. Now that we had this new revenue source, we needed to start planning, and then the pandemic hit. So we didn't ask for anything. So 2023 is probably the first year that you're seeing where, as a city, we had evaluated everything, realized how short-staffed we were, and started to come up with a plan to fill those positions.
And part of the cost as well was we started implementing the compensation program for the unclassified personnel around 2023 as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question about this as
Ms.
well?
Bowers.
Yeah, thank you. I just find it interesting. So the increased capital improvement projects you have categorized as a category, and you've identified Parks and Rec and Engineering. The street tree program falls within Parks and Recreation, is that right?
That is correct.
And the city arborist, that position existed prior to an expansion of a street tree program, is that correct?
Yes.
What staffing adds have resulted as a result of the street tree program?
I would have to follow up with that question, and I'd be happy to do so next week. Director Farrell and her team are planning a street tree program update, and if you recall back at least 2 years ago when Director Farrell stood before this podium, she indicated that an increase in staff would be needed to run a full-scale street tree program that was being asked to be run.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood how that was identified in this slide and as a separate call out.
Well, just very, very quickly, and Miranda will get better data for next week to answer the question more comprehensively, but the arborist went from a 4-person to a supervisor when we backfilled the 4-person, and then successively down there. So the street tree program has had a tremendous impact, has seen an increase in resources, and is not capital, so therefore is listed on this particular slide individually and not covered under capital improvement projects.
And the sidewalk program has also been expanded and required staffing increases, is that right?
Correct, and that's why that one is directly on, that's handled under capital. So capital improvement projects, planning, Parks and Recreation and Engineering is where you would see the street tree program.
Okay, I understand, thank you.
So just real quick, some of these bolded items are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously public safety, the street tree program, speaks for itself. Increased capital improvement projects. I'm sure anybody that's been driving around the city for the last couple of years, can testify to that. But I'd be remiss if we didn't use this opportunity, I think, to maybe educate some of those in the public. The citywide initiatives, are there maybe 2 or 3 that you guys think are the most impactful that would want to share with those that might be tuning in, or perhaps even the folks that stuck around from the Citizens Academy?
Yeah, so we classify a citywide initiative as something that impacts the entire city. So for example, the Parks Master Plan, we would categorize that in Parks and Recreation, but if it touches more than one department, we categorize that as citywide initiative. So currently we have the Gahanna Strategic and Economic Development Plan ongoing. The Comprehensive Transportation and Mobility Plan is a plan that involves many different directors as well. We have compensation programs. Sorry, I have a slide somewhere else. Where is?
Chapter 9 code updates.
OpenGov, asset management.
OpenGov, asset management, yeah. A variety of things that impact many more than just one individual department.
Okay.
Risk and safety programs, those are citywide initiatives as well.
ATP, active transportation plan.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that?
Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, I really do appreciate the question. I want to make sure I really understand here, because I think that I understand that some of these programs or these plans, these strategies, these citywide initiatives have been like one-time projects. And so we've earmarked one-time spending for consultants to do these plans and to interface, yes, with directors. What's the ongoing, or could you help connect staffing ads? Is it because of the recommendations that are going to outcrop from these plans, or is it doing the plan itself is necessitating a staffing ad?
Yes, it's both. Right, you do need somebody to manage, everything that gets done in this city needs somebody to manage it on this side of the ledger, if you would, on the government side of the ledger. When we hire a consultant Director Farrell was up here and she was talking about Academy Park and she was talking about Pod being hired as the designer. There is a resource on the city side that needs to manage that contractor to make sure that we're getting everything that it is we need, right? And maybe a construction project's a little bit easier, so I'll continue with that particular one. When construction happens on that particular project, a city resource needs to follow, and that's the way in which I'll say it, follow those particular contractors around to make sure that the plan and the design that we've come up with is being implemented and executed appropriately. So that happens on many, many different levels as it relates to a project. As it relates to some of these planning initiatives, yes, a plan needs managed and then implemented at the backside of it. Every plan, I'm just going to continue with Parks and Rec. The Parks and Rec Master Plan has an implementation schedule that goes with it, and there are folks and resources that are necessary in order to implement that plan. As we go through the strategic planning process, there are going to be recommendations of things that we do in order to implement that plan and stay current with that plan. And every plan has it. Why plan if there's no implementation strategy at the backside? So yeah, there are city resources that are necessary in order to manage almost everything that it is that we do, even when it comes down to a plan. Again, the strategic plan, the comprehensive transportation and mobility plan, the ATP, all of those plans need managed and executed upon so that, 10 years when we refer to it as the thoroughfare plan, right? The comprehensive transportation and mobility plan needs updated. There are actual things that we can point to it that basically say we have done A, B, C, and D inside of this plan to reach what the community has requested as part of that plan. So yeah, there's a tremendous drain, if you would, on resources in order to plan and then execute on the plan. When the planning process is over, that's when, in my opinion, that's when a lot of the real work starts, the tactical work starts of implementing that plan.
Thank you. I was just chuckling because a thoroughfare plan is less of a mouthful than what the
Absolutely it is.
comprehensive transportation and mobility plan. I think I got it all?
You got it right.
Okay, all right, yeah, thoroughfare plan. Okay, anything further from council on that particular item?
Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
question.
Ms. Jones.
And maybe this will come up in different sections, but so we mentioned multiple plans that have the consultants working through the plan. I guess we're talking about personnel dollars. Where are the consultant dollars? Are those within?
Contract services.
On the
Contract services?
contract services? Okay. Okay. All right.
All good?
For now.
Anything further from council? All right, thank you very much. Moving on.
So the next slide is just an overview of, this is the general fund only. So I'll repeat that, the general fund only, expenditures by department. So the first department we're going to talk about today is Mayor's Court. Before I started, I just want to give you a general overview of how these slides are laid out for each department. So there will be a 2024 accomplishment slide, a 2025 priority. We'll go over department expenses and revenues, staffing, and then capital. And then questions that were directed towards the departments are also in these sections as well. So if we don't like this format after today, please let me know before I start the next one tomorrow morning. So, and just a note for the record, all of the information in these departments can be found in the individual department narrative, so we have just pulled things out of the book to make them a little more digestible for everybody, and then so you can more easily find those things. The accomplishments and priorities are just the top selected ones from the individual departments, and so we'll just go over those briefly. So the 2024 achievement for the Mayor's Court, they worked on e-ticketing with the Division of Police and the IT department. Currently there are 70% of our officers are using e-ticketing, and that resulted in significant reductions in data entry. There was a question submitted for Mayor's Court. It was on page 65. Is there a progress update on e-citation capabilities? Are there any anticipated cost changes, increases, or decreases with full implementation? So there's the 70% of the officers are using it currently. So there are no additional costs as all technology needed is purchased at this time. So we are getting new cruisers in, and so when those new cruisers are going into service, they do have the e-ticketing capability added to those cruisers as well. But the remaining cruisers that need it, the technology has been purchased with 2024 monies.
Thank you.
Moving on to the 2025 priorities for Mayor's Court is to continue to collaborate with our friends down the road in New Albany, and then to continue to collaborate with the Division of Police to fully implement the e-ticketing citation. And also, Director Parker and her team are working actively to ensure a smooth transition over at 825 with their court records as well by digitizing many of their records. So the next two slides we'll just throw up on the screen if you have any questions. The first slide talks about expenditures, and then we do have a revenue slide as well.
Anything from council on this slide? Seeing none.
And the revenue is,
Anything from council on the revenue side?
great. We will move on to human resources. So for the 2024 achievements for the human resources team, they successfully hired 16 full-time unclassified, 3 part-time unclassified, 6 full-time classified. Those would be our union employees, mostly in the steel workers. 166 seasonals, which I know that many of you know, and Director Farrell and her team has talked about before. This was the largest seasonal class we've had since I've been here in 6 years. So the HR team worked well with that Parks and Rec team to make sure that was a smooth process this year. We hired 2 communications technicians. We've since hired 2 more. It just approved an offer today. 5 police officers, 2 police sergeants, and 4 interns. The team also launched a learning management system this year. We call that an LMS, if you see that in the book. And then they hosted when this was made, they've hosted 12 engagement activities and 16 wellness program activities, with more planned through the last quarter of the year. In 2025, the top priorities for Manager Nolan and his team are to establish a citywide training program, reimagine the onboarding process by using technology, including that LMS system and our financial and HRIS system, to launch an onboarding academy, as well as review and implement the recommendations from the employee engagement survey, and then to continue to evaluate employee health benefits and wellness programming. The next slide is the HR expenditures. There was a question asked, please address budget items related to ongoing or new projects to be performed by consultants. The HR expenditures, there are no programs being performed by consultants. We have consultants, but they aren't performing any projects. So if there's a clarification on that question, I'd be happy to address it further. The increase in the HR contract services is for professional services for the union contract negotiations. City Attorney Tamala Larison and I talked, and we have moved the dollars for contract negotiations into the HR budget and out of the law budget because we were just exchanging a bunch of emails to get bills paid. And then we also are continuing our insurance broker services with NFP outside of the consortium.
Anything from council on this slide?
Are there any additional anticipated professional services that are identified as part of contract services? And thank you for calling those out.
Like new ones or?
Well, what's included in 2024? And then you identified the new ones, I think, already. So what would be continuing going forward?
Like projects, programs, I'm not sure. If you want a detailed list of what the $365,000 is, I can send you that list.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
That'll be a follow-up email.
Somebody behind me probably has it written down already, is my guess.
Yep, Ms. Bowers, do
Yeah,
you have more?
I just wanted to mention, and I should have done this with Ms. Parker as well, but I wanted to make sure to take the opportunity to congratulate you on the successes of the department, to both you and Mr. Nolan. I know that you guys have put in a lot of work, and your teams have done a lot of work, and so I definitely see it reflected here, and so I want you to hear that as part of this process, not just the kind of the criticisms or the questions, but also recognition that there's certainly a lot of great work and organization and process improvement that you and your team have been identifying. So good work. Thank you.
Anything further from council with regard to that particular slide? Please continue.
So the HR doesn't have any revenue lines. So these are the questions that were submitted. So on page 35, should the requested addition of the training coordinator reside in HR instead of finance, giving HR's focus on training and development? That recommendation is from the staffing study. So the consultant did recommend that training coordinator be placed in the admin and ops line under the finance department. That would report up through DAS, through Senior Director Weibensinger and myself. The reason for that is because it is funded 50% out of the Division of Police and then 50% out of that finance account. So this person will really assist multiple different departments with training needs, and that's why we and the consultant recommended it to be housed under DAS, because it will assist the police function. There's a sergeant and lieutenant in charge of training over there, as well as the risk and safety program. As we do a lot of safety, building up the safety program, there's a lot of training and coordination there. And then as well as HR identifying training for all employees. So in order to centralize it, that's where it was recommended to be centralized.
Anything further from council? Please continue.
Page 68, how does the budget support succession planning for key positions across the city, especially in the light of future retirements or potential turnover? As Director Burry stated earlier, when we do know about, for example, she has got a long-time employee retiring at the end of this year, we were made notification of that, and that employee did graciously give us her retirement letter early so we could plan for that. And so we were able to find some ways to take what she does, realign it, and then open up a position to help finance team do some procurement and other things that's listed in the staffing study. So how the budget supports that, one of the things we do as a city and HR champions is our development efforts by advocating and budgeting for different programs. So some of those programs are the Management Development Program, the Emerging Leader Program that is starting, their first session is tomorrow. Those run through a company, Pradco, who we've had a multi-year agreement with to provide those services. We also advocate and budget for things like tuition reimbursement, funding for certifications for professional development. We partner with a lot of different agencies for training, such as the City of Columbus, MORPC and the MAPS program, and then other state and national chapters for professional development and training.
follow-up from council? Please continue.
The next question is from page 68. Regarding the forthcoming training program, how would learning objectives be determined? Would these be compliance and/or development-oriented? Any focus on equity inclusion? So the preliminary plan with HR is to start with a new onboarding program, which will walk new hires through their entire first year and include training, meeting with their cohorts, and interacting with each department. Ongoing training will focus on compliance, development, wellness, well-being, and workplace culture.
Any follow-up from council? Please continue.
The next question, as on page 69, have trends been identified as responsible for turnover? So on the next slide, we do have a slide that here shows voluntary turnover from 2020 to 2024. So this is only for voluntary turnover. That is when an employee resigns for various reasons, so it does not include retirements. It just really depicts those folks who have voluntarily left the city. The current turnover is at 5%. Which we would consider to be decent for the public sector. To date, we've had 6 employees leave for promotional opportunities, including some in the private sector, and then 3 individuals had a change in profession, so for a total of 9.
Anything from council on that item?
I did have a follow-up question to the first question that I missed asking. I apologize.
Sure.
The training coordinator that would live in the finance department, I was just having a hard time identifying it in the organizational structure charts.
Yep, so the division in finance, the admin ops division in finance is what captures one-time initiatives and salary and benefits for the senior directors, the folks who work in DAS, the management analyst, the grants person, they're all funded out of there. So the training coordinator would actually report through Senior Deputy Director Weibensinger through that chain. The org chart would be...
I'm looking at page 72, but it's not finance department? So
No,
I guess I'm
it's
not.
on the mayor's office org chart.
Would this be the first person reporting directly to Senior Director Weibensinger, or Senior Deputy Director Weibensinger? Deputy Senior Director? I'm sorry, did I get it right finally on the third time?
He has a handful of folks that report to him.
Okay. I'm trying to find that org chart.
No idea.
Okay. So the training coordinator would be under the risk and safety administrator and then flow up to the senior deputy director.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from council, I guess, regarding that prior question or the question regarding voluntary turnover?
Yeah, I had just a question. So I think you kind of addressed it about how does the budget take into account turnover? And you mentioned if we know about the turnover, we impact that. But also knowing our trend is at that 5% for, I guess, the last 2 years. Does the budget take into account that trend at all?
No, we budget for each person that we're planning on bringing on board and those that are existing employees, except for those that we know. Where we bring the trend in is for the out years. So we budget 2025 by person, by position, and then we look at those trend lines to figure out, okay, what would our 26 look like, 27, 28, 29?
Okay.
And in the next quarterly report, Director Burry and her team will report back on if they have the projections of how much like salary and benefit savings there were for 2024. Because at this time of the year, they can start running those projections.
Okay.
Anything else from council? All right, please continue.
So the next department is finance. Some of the 2024 achievements, we secured the city's AA1 rating with Moody's earlier this year, back in February. that went along with the successful issuance of the bonds for 825, and then receiving the GFOA awards for the ACFR and budget book as well. The 2025 priorities include issuing a PAFR, or a Popular Annual Financial Report, to continue to monitor the accounting system by entering capital assets and implementing a builder that helps us build those reports, and then working with the executive team to continue to move forward the capital improvement plan, and then monitoring and reporting for the capital improvement plan. The next slide has the expenditures for the finance department. And there was a question submitted on page 75. There's a large year-over-year decline in contract services attributed to the finance department. Please be prepared to list and discuss the drivers of this change and whether the decline is expected to reoccur. So this is the account we were talking about earlier, the admin and ops division, where citywide initiatives are captured. So on the next slide, we have a listing of 2024 one-time expenses, and then the add for 2025, which results in the net that you saw on the last page of roughly $800,000. So those plans that were budgeted one-time expenses for 2024, the staffing study is done, so that PO and any dollars remaining will be returned. The strategic plan is ongoing. The Board of Elections was the increase that Director Burry brought a few months ago. I brought forward the assessment for our last risk insurance pool that was ceasing function. We owed them that assessment of about $200,000. And then for 2025, we're recommending to add $100,000 for a community grant program.
I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Anything from council on this particular slide or topic?
I have a couple of follow-ups.
Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you. You identified that the staffing study is concluded, so I would anticipate that that 100,000 is like off our books at this point.
That is correct.
What of the other items listed under 2024 is completed and the funds have been completely distributed or dispersed?
Board of Election is done. The property taxes for 825 are done. The assessment has been paid, I believe.
Yeah, we haven't listed anymore. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the camera study and where that sets. And then, of course, the strategic plan is ongoing right now.
So the monies that have not yet been spent but earmarked for the strategic plan, the sustainability plan, and perhaps the camera study, those will be reappropriated or re-requested?
No, so those are already on open purchase orders. They've already gone through the procurement process and are sitting on open purchase orders. So at the end of the year, those encumbrances roll, or those purchase orders roll over, and then the associated appropriations also roll over with those.
Just as a note there, the sustainability plan is not on an open PO.
Not
Those
on-
monies would go back to the fund that they came from at the end of the year.
So the ongoing projects that are sitting on an open PO would roll over. Those that are not on an open project would be closed and returned.
So per the procurement policy, for example, the strategic plan, we've signed a contract with Planning Next, so that money will stay appropriated on the open PO to pay for their invoices through next year. So we don't need any additional dollars for the strategic plan. But per the procurement policy, any dollars that, like if you don't have a contract signed, if you're not going to expend it, Director Burry, Kevin and I, we look at all those and they are all closed and that money's returned to the appropriate fund that it came from. So in this example, most of these are general fund. The money would be returned to the general fund.
So the sustainability plan has not been, purchase order has not been created?
No.
We've not initiated a process to execute on a sustainability plan, no.
Okay. And is that included in the 2025 request for contract services?
It is not. The only add is the community grant program for $100,000. If, let's say, for example, on this particular slide, we were going to plan on doing a sustainability plan in 2025, we would show it on both sides of the ledger at this particular point.
Okay, so I see a 2025 request of 2.3 million. And looking at page 75 in my book on contract services, 2025 request, 2.3 million.
Yeah, the question that was asked was about the delta between 2024 and 2025. The question wasn't for an all-inclusive list of what that 2.3 million represents. If you do want that detail, we could do the same thing where we could provide it along with the HR detail.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. Yes.
Anything further from council?
Yeah, can I just ask, because I think we're contract services, maybe that's consultants that do like one-time thing, but also
Ongoing.
Ongoing. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically services that we don't do in-house, professional services that we don't do in-house, that a contractor or a vendor is doing on our behalf. That's what ends up in the contract services.
Okay.
So it's still the city's work, they're just doing it on our behalf.
And so when you get us the updated list, will it specify?
Yeah, it lists out in detail
Okay.
what is all in that ask.
Okay, thank you.
I would say an example of that would be the Franklin County Public Health contract that was just brought to council at the Committee of the Whole. That is an example, something that would be contract services within that bucket.
And Rita as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And reoccurring, like those are reoccurring.
Yeah, so like in the finance, in that citywide one also is like our risk management program, that's almost $400,000. Those kind of things are all in that $2.3 million.
Yeah, copy machines on the IT side, software contracts, things that are, Microsoft 365, great example, right? Everybody has it. Everybody needs it. That's the line that it would fall under.
Thank you.
Anything further from council? Just a couple questions that I have. So back to that particular question, there was, it asked whether or not that decline is expected to recur. I understand you don't have a crystal ball going out to, 2030 or 2035 or anything like that, but just looking at kind of the run rate, actual in 22 was a little over $1 million, actual in 23 was a little over 1.2. And then, of course, we saw a large jump in 2024 appropriated because of a lot of these one-time initiatives. Is your best guess at this point that the 2.3 is kind of a stable run rate, or do you anticipate that to decline or increase?
Some of these are based on how much revenue we actually collect.
Okay.
Like Rita is a percentage of the revenue. Franklin County auditor and treasurer fees are based on those collections that come in for property taxes. So some of them would be predicted based on the revenue collected. So if we have revenue spikes, we're going to have expenditure spikes for those related services. As far as other things like the Board of Election, like I would not expect to ever have an assessment payment while I'm still here. I don't think we're going to be changing risk insurance anytime soon. Board of Election, again, that just depends on who's all going to the polls, what kind of election are we having? Is it a general election? Is it a special election? Those all have various calculations based on who all is going to the ballot at that point in time and what type of election it is. So it is kind of hard to pinpoint, but I would say that probably that 2 million-ish number is probably a good number going out into the future.
And then just an additional question regarding one of the items here on 2024's list, the 825 property tax. Is that just a delay in us?
Yeah,
filing for
we'll get those funds back. They've already granted the exemption, but it takes some time for the refund to work its way through the system.
Would that be reflected in this table at some point down the road, or does that go into a different fund?
No, it'll come back into the general fund, but it'll come back as, depending on the year. So if they get us our refund back in the same year that we pay the taxes, it's just a reduction of expenditures.
Okay.
If we get the refund back the year after the expenditure happens, it then becomes another revenue source.
Sure.
Because you can't reduce an expenditure that's happened in the previous year.
Yep.
So depending on when we receive it, it'll either be reported as a revenue or a reduction to expenditures.
So just me being a bit of a geek, would that be below the line, other sources of revenue, or would that?
Yeah, there would be other.
All right, good guess. And then regarding the one ad for 2025, what's the source of funds for the grant program? I know this is something in the past that I think historically has been paid out of ARPA money that was source from the federal government. I'm just curious if that's expected to continue here.
The ARPA funds are not continuing, so this request is for money out of the general fund.
Okay. So tax dollars from,
That is correct.
okay. I have some concerns about that. I understand we're still kind of in the fact-finding stage of this, so I'm not going to debate it here tonight, but at some point down the road, I'll weigh in on that one. All right. Anything further from council?
Would it help at this point, since we are in a fact-finding stage, to perhaps get some input from the community grant program and maybe share with us the number of grant recipients and the general, like summarize the impact to the community?
I believe, didn't you do that?
Just like a couple minute refresher of that presentation. I know you've already done that, Director.
Just a quick catch-up. So we started the community grant program in 23 and 24 using the ARPA dollars, as was mentioned. In 23, we had 9 recipients of 50,000 total. And then in 24, we had 15 recipients. We had 100,000 total. So what we're proposing for 25 is essentially what we call a cookie cutter of the 23 and 24 program with a not to exceed amount of $100,000. It is general fund revenue is what's being proposed. But what we are looking for is to keep the program consistent. It has been a great resource for the nonprofits that have been part of the program over the last 2 years. And so what we are trying to do is keep that community engagement and that involvement with the city and the nonprofits to help Gahanna-based nonprofits. Any particular questions on the details of it, or?
I recall generally, and if you don't have it today, it's okay, but my understanding is that some of our grant funding was able to facilitate matching funds from outside
Correct, yeah.
organizations, and so actually bringing more dollars even into Gahanna to those nonprofits.
That's correct.
Is
So
that right?
matching is not a requirement for us for under this program, but a lot, I would say a fair share, have utilized the funds from this program to match bigger allocations. A great example would be, one of the more recent ones would be Grin doing food lockers at the high school and at their location. They were able to leverage the funds we gave to then go out to other donors, and were able to turn, a third of the project cost from us into a full project. Yep.
Yeah, Ms. Bedell.
I can't remember if you told us this when you gave your presentation, but is there a follow-up process, like after the money has been given? What is the follow-up process to ensure that these projects are?
Yeah, so we have onboarded our grants analyst, and that grants analyst works under me. And what we are doing is we are closing out the 23 programs right now. So we have 7 of the 9 of the 23 program that we would consider closed projects. And we are in the midst of monitoring the 24 projects. Some of the 24 projects are what we would consider complete. Some of them were low-hanging fruit projects or things that were time-sensitive. Others are longer-term projects. Some involve pulling permits to ensure that things are being done properly. And others are for events that just haven't occurred yet. So we do have a monitoring process in place that we will go through into next spring. Again, these funds the ARPA funds needed to be obligated by December 31st of this year, expended by December 31st of 26. So we do have some time to work with our nonprofits to ensure their projects are successful. And then with the 25 program, we would do the same process as well.
Thank you.
Mayor Javin.
Thank you. If I could, I just want to highlight, given some of the questions that were asked earlier about citywide initiatives and the ongoing process, this is a great example of a program that requires ongoing management, so to speak, by staff. So we established a community grants program. Director Weibensinger was responsible for getting the application created, getting the application out, organizing the committee that then reviewed the applications, getting all of the notices that went out, and then after those monies were issued, it's a matter of monitoring that and following up and making sure that those monies are used consistent with the purpose for which they were granted. So it's not just a one-and-done program, it's an ongoing initiative that requires the expenditure of staff time and resources involved in this. So just given the fact that we were talking about that earlier, I wanted to highlight that this is a great example of a program that was listed as a citywide initiative that does impact personnel.
So maybe it would be helpful at a future Finance Committee meeting for us to maybe see like an ROI. So we've got the earmarked dollars, plus we have a percentage of staff time, perhaps from multiple staff members. But what have we seen in the 2 years with the program now being implemented in terms of bringing dollars back into Gahanna? Does that make sense?
Yeah, some of the projects we would be able to, I would say, capture that. Others, I'm not sure if we're looking to put a financial number on it as opposed to a betterment of the community, I think is going to take some looking at and see what we can come up with those data on that as well. One example would be, at the Gahanna Ages and Abilities Partnership, the 254 Club, where snacks and healthy snacks for kids. Putting a financial number on what that return on investment would be, I think we might struggle with that. Also for, supplies for extracurricular activities to keep the kids engaged so they want to come to there as opposed to do other. Acquisition of materials for 3D printers and things like that are going to be challenging. And then with the creative options is, a plant and seed library for the adult with disabilities day program in order to have an involvement with the community in a program like that. So we can look at how we can measure ROI on some of these, but we are going to have some that with matching funds may be easier to do.
You might be surprised from the nonprofit partners how they're able to quantify the impact. So we might be able to get some help from our nonprofit recipients.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from council? Just a quick clarifying item. So to date, no general fund / City of Gahanna tax dollars have been spent on this program directly. I understand Mr. Weibenseeger doesn't work for free. The grants analyst doesn't work for free, but nonetheless, that to date, it has been federal dollars. Is that correct?
Correct. For award issuance has been ARPA, yes.
All right. Just want to make sure that's clear to anybody at home.
Yep.
Anything further from council? All right. Thank you. Please continue.
The next slide we have is finance revenue.
Any questions regarding this slide? All right. Seeing none.
The next department we have is IT. So this will be an example of a department that has staffing and capital in it. So for 2024, the achievements that we wanted to highlight today, Director Carter and her staff, were advanced reporting and detection tools implemented on endpoints as part of our cybersecurity initiatives, weekly cyber hygiene scanning through our partners at CISA, and then completed implementation of CityWorks, which is our asset management system. For 2025, the IT department plans to continue planning and executing for technology at 825 Tech Center Drive, reducing the technology stack by consolidating duplicative platforms. For end users and city employees to increase customer service and decrease support times and improve standards, and then continued efforts with the Division of Police to implement the CAD and RMS project. The next slide is IT expenditures. The question on contract services was asked for IT as well. Would you like a listing of what's made up of the $900,000 in contract services? Because there are no, the increase has to do with some new software agreements such as Microsoft Cloud, citywide technology platforms that are used citywide, such as like our learning management system, applicant tracking system, OpenGov, things like that. Those are programmed in the IT expenditure lines because they're citywide and not directly tied to one department. So those all have clauses for increased maintenance fees as well. And then we have purchased some different penetration testing for security and system security testing. So that's what most of the $186,000 differences.
Just to clarify, I think the question, the prepared question that I have is regarding the salaries and benefits.
we're
line.
getting to
I
that
have
one.
that. I have those two. That's in the couple slides, yeah. This was the question that was submitted as asking for the IT and HR consultants performing work on their behalf.
Anything from council regarding IT expenditures? All right, please continue.
The next one is the IT revenue slide. And then the next page has the questions. So on page 79, are they asked in the 2025 budget request sufficient for the successful transition to 825? So most of the larger item costs for the move to 825 are included in the capital budget, which Senior Director Schultz will talk about here soon. So yes, we've budgeted for that. In the event that we're too early to know what some of those budget requests are, we would come back if the money isn't already included in the capital budget, but most of it is.
Colleagues, anything regarding that item? All right, please continue.
And then page 80, other than the systems analyst role, what else is driving the $280,000 change in salary and benefits? And Director Burry is going to address that question.
Yes, so into the 2024 budget, if you recall, there was a ask for a second IT support specialist that was removed, and instead we moved forward with a CAD administrator. That CAD administrator position became vacant. So Ordinance 0035 was passed by council to go ahead and not fill the CAD administrator, but instead bring on that IT support specialist. So part of the increase is recognizing a full year of that second IT support specialist, plus the system admin. Then the other thing that we found, which you guys also noted on Miranda's slide, was we did find where the module that we use within Munis to project salaries and benefits has a little error in it. So you'll see some corrections come forward on salaries and benefits. But basically, the other piece of that increase was an error in the module that we use for the projection.
Colleagues, anything regarding that?
I guess I'm not completely clear, like, so the 284 is net?
It's not correct
Okay.
because of the error in the
Yeah,
finance
there
system.
is an increase, but it's not as high of an increase as what's reflected here.
Part of it is when the CAD administrator, we got that, it was funded 50% out of IT and 50% out of police. So when we brought forward Ordinance 35, it was to move 100% of the IT support specialist salary into the IT budget.
Okay. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful.
Yep.
Colleagues, anything regarding that last question? Anything else? Do you have more? I saw
Oh,
this.
yeah.
All right.
Yep. Sure do. So I did do the staffing presentation last week, so I'll just briefly go through these if anybody has any questions. We are requesting to add a systems analyst. It was identified as a priority too. On the next slide is the org chart just showing where that would be. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any additional questions on the IT staffing.
Colleagues? None?
And then Senior Director Schultz will handle the capital.
Director Schultz, floor is yours.
I'll just like to point out that my slide up there says the 25 capital request for 9.0, the technology program. That 9.0, for anybody following at home, is the section within the CIP that technology programming is identified. So the two obviously closely tie together. Every week here that we do go over capital from this point out to the end of the year here, we're going to start with this particular slide so that you guys can get a good idea and a refresher, if you would, on where the technology program fits into the larger capital budget itself. I would make a note, obviously I have the technology program at one, basically, I'll call it an even $1 million just for argument's sake, say right here. I will note from last week that that number has gone down, hence my green arrow down. We did reduce that number by $360,000 because I had realized as I was putting together these capital slides, that I had double counted a couple numbers, and I'll give you a reason, a better reason here as we get through the project here. I did, obviously, it's the same slide as I showed last week with some updated, but I did in the lower right-hand corner indicate that this is an updated slide from last week. So as we continue to flip through here, right, IT or information technology capital budget is comprised of mainly three different categories: fiber optic technology or infrastructure, IT infrastructure, and then systems and application. The chart that you're looking at through the middle is very similar, just obviously for this one category, broken down by each of the individual funds. So capital funds, TIF funds, water funds. Obviously, the IT budget is a little bit boring, and they only like to tap into one fund. Technically, fiber optics could tap into TIF funds, obviously, to create that communication network. But in this particular instance, we're not asking to actually tap into any TIF funds as it relates to the capital budget at this particular point in time. I will note one of the biggest differences from last week's slides to this week's slides is you do see up there, and it's highlighted on the left-hand side of the slide, but a prior year reallocation. Okay, it's very similar to what we were discussed as it related to the, I forget exactly what slide we were on a couple minutes ago, but these are basically monies that have, or projects that were allocated or resourced in 2024, and they haven't necessarily gotten to a point yet where we're able to encumber those funds and open up a PO. So in this particular instance, what's best practice and what meets our procurement policy, and then also what meets the tenor of the CIP itself, is to actually, if you would, return those dollars at the end of the year and re-ask for those dollars at the beginning of the year in 2025. So what we will do throughout this whole entire process as we go through capital, where we can indicate that we're going to be returning money and then asking for it again in 2025, in the 25 budget, we will show it in the fashion that we have up on the screen. Right now, for fiber optic, hold on here. Let me catch up with myself, and you guys know how I can have a tendency to get ahead of myself. The 25 ask right now is for this column here, the capital improvement column. Sorry, my mouse is a little bit slow, but basically the $1 million ask. Right, we are asking for another $1 million in prior year allocation, this year's allocation for next year. I'm going to go to the fiber optic page on my next sheet here, and this maybe explains it a little bit better. Let me just go over some higher level notes, and we'll get back to this reallocation part and piece. But we manage, the city of Gahanna manages 21 miles of fiber optic cable throughout the city. I think it's important to note that this connects all city facilities together. And when I say all city facilities, not every park is connected with the fiber optic network, but this building is connected to 400 West Johnstown as an example. There are other parks, Friendship Park, the Parks and Rec, and the maintenance garage is connected via our fiber network. So it connects the city facilities together. It connects all public safety facilities together. So every firehouse is connected. The police department is connected to 400 West Johnstown. And then we also have other connections that run on our fiber network for other outside agencies like Whitehall, Bexley, and New Albany, our partners at the 911 center and through the MEC. Though they also run on our fiber network in order to get to 400. We connect every school building together through our fiber optic network and through our fiber optic network. And then it's also utilized by the CIC in agreement with the city. So they're dedicated a certain number of fiber optic pairs in which they can use to generate revenue off of the fiber optic, off of fiber optics. In the past, under the old CNA process, we used to allocate $400,000 annually towards fiber optic expansion and redundancy. Basically, that first line that you're looking at on the project sheet here. Right, what we used to do under CNA process, and this wasn't just for fiber optic, but this was for projects overall, was we would allow those funds to grow year over year over year, and then when we reached a threshold in order to execute on a project, we would encumber those funds, sign a contract, and then we would execute on a project. Under the CIP process, and what the CIP document indicates is that we will be funding projects in total the year in which they're set up. So as we were going through the budgeting process for this year, we were looking at old POs that are open, so on and so forth, and there was about $1.1 million PO that was open for fiber network expansion and redundancy purposes. So basically what we've done in that particular instance, is we're going to be returning that $1.1 million PO, but we're going to be asking that you folks reallocate $760,000, $63,000 of that fiber PO, or that old money, if you would, towards the budget, towards the 25 budget. As you can see based on my slide here, there's no 25 ask, because basically this is old money, and this money isn't included in like Joanne's revenue slides or fund balance slides, so on and so forth, because technically it was tied up. I know this is I can see on Mr. Schnetzer's face, it looks a little bit confusing. This has been confusing for us as well as we work through this. This is how I ended up double counting the $360,000 when we presented slides last week and even to the CIP Advisory Committee. And then when I was putting these slides together, I said, oh, wait, these numbers are in the same column. I've double counted those, which is what gave me the ability to reduce the fiber monies on the first slide here. I'll go back real quick. I'm sorry, on this particular slide here, this number here was $360,000 more than it is currently. I don't believe, I probably shouldn't say this, especially over this public mic, I don't believe that I've double counted any other projects on the CIP side, but please don't hold me to that.
Very quickly, Director Schultz, will we, as council, see this particular portion of capital again at a later date? And I guess I just want to kind of maybe understand a little bit more. Again, this budget process is different than we've proceeded in the past. You know, next Monday, we've got Parks and Rec, and then some weeks after that is dedicated to capital. Just to make sure that we all have an opportunity here, or that we're making the best use of our time with regard to the information that you're presenting. Will this come back again at some point in time, or is speak now or forever hold your peace?
No, this won't specifically come back. I think that if there are questions, right, they can still submit questions to you on that Wednesday, Thursday deadline, whatever it is, and we'll be ready to address those questions the following week, absolutely. Will it come back specifically? No, it won't come back specifically unless requested.
I mean, just based on the questions, I have nothing regarding capital.
Yeah.
And as I was reviewing the book, I did not move on to the capital section.
I got you.
And I'm seeing some of my colleagues nod their head as well, that was how they proceeded. So just want to make sure that, again, from more of a process and how we're expected to guide the conversation, that we're kind of following along with what's expected.
I would say this, and I hope that you guys know this, is if 3 weeks from now you guys ask a question on fiber optic networks, that we're going to answer it sitting before this desk.
But moving forward, it will be, the IT department's a good example of how the other departments who have staffing or capital will be moving forward. So the achievements, the priorities, expenditures,
Correct.
Revenues, staffing, and then capital.
So we should, up here, to make the best use of our time, so next week with regard to Parks and Rec, we should go to the capital section, find the Parks and Rec capital projects, and if we have any questions on those, submit those to you guys next week, as opposed to waiting until the capital improvement plan or
Yeah,
capital
because the
projects date.
Correct, because the capital, total capital and staffing was presented last week, and so now it'll be broke down by department. If you want us to bring all the capital back, we certainly can. We just need to know, when.
I guess I'll defer to council how they wish to proceed. But like I said, my assumption, if you will, based on the calendar, was that we would tackle all of capital on one particular date. But if the administration has other plans, I suppose I'm amenable to a different approach.
My expectation, I guess, was that we would try to cover capital at the same time as the department, but I know that we got budget books very late in the process on this one, so admittedly, I struggled to get through reviewing this before questions were due, as you already know. But if you're willing to take a couple questions on capital now from the dais, and then certainly, of course, you've already said that you'd be happy to take questions later on if people have questions after the presentation.
I'm ready to roll now, or we can wait. It's up to you guys.
Powers, you have the floor.
All right. I guess, and you might have already said this, Director, so I apologize.
What's,
So I do, sorry, Ms. Bowers, I do have two other capital slides if you want me to get through the whole deck, or do you have questions on fiber specifically?
Why don't you go ahead and do the two other capital items, and then we'll cover all of them, and I'll hold my questions.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you. This is a learning process altogether.
So the second category is for IT infrastructure. IT infrastructure is networking equipment, servers, SANs, things that actually run the operation here. This is actually a little bit opposite of what I just said, where we were returning money. This year, we had asked for $300,000 in networking equipment to be purchased. We haven't executed on that particular project because of the move to 825, but we are asking to reallocate that money in 25. But then we're also asking for an additional $525,000 in the networking equipment lifecycle and upgrade line, for a total of $825,000. And then we're also asking for $60,000 in servers and $260,000 in storage equipment, for a total ask of $845,000, new ask, 25 ask of $845,000, and with the reallocation, $1.145 million. The last project in this particular sequence is for system applications. System applications are the 911 system upgrade and lifecycle project here is just identified. We will be needing additional 911 equipment down at 825 Tech Center Drive, so this has been allocated in this particular instance. And then the LiveScan fingerprint system is the system in which folks will put their fingerprints into, and it goes out and does background checks and those types of things. And that system is, regardless of moving to 825, that system is at an end of life and in need of replacement, and that's why you see the $40,000 ask for the LiveScan fingerprint system. That system would be installed down at 825 and not necessarily here at the Gahanna Police Department that we know and love today. But the ask on the system application side is $190,000. Obviously, like I already indicated, this one's a little bit boring. All of these are capital fund dollars. Even on the reallocation side. This slide here is just the last slide is just flipping back to the beginning. And with that, I could take questions on the capital side.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Ms. Bowers, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, so just, let me start just in terms of kind of form, so I'm like making sure I'm reading the book correctly, since we're doing this a little bit differently and sort of new at this. Looking at page 115 of the budget that lays out the capital improvement, that chart. So.
That's the list of projects?
The list of projects. So that, if I'm just looking at, for example, fiber optic network expansion and redundancy, is that it?
Redundancy, yeah, sorry, I had to abbreviate it to fit it in the column there. Should be a period there.
So that, just to help me make sure I'm clear, the 263 that's identified there.
Mm-hmm. I'm no longer asking for the 263. There's an amendment to the book. That's part of the monies that were being returned. I'm not asking anything fiber on there that you would see is a reallocation and not actually a new ask for 25. It would. I don't know if Director Burry and I have actually worked through the process of showing the reallocation in the book or not, but that's something that we have to mechanically work through as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that I would hopefully come back to us with that so that we
Sure.
can see where that's reflected.
Yep, it is a new process, so we are working out the kinks. But the other thing that we were kind of thinking is that we do have some that could have the potential of getting enough in order before the end of the year, that we can follow the procurement policy. So we're actually leaning to a possible Q1, where we would come back and say, here are all the projects that were, and more of a supplemental appropriation versus being part of the original appropriation ordinance.
But help me understand, if it's a reallocation of 2024 dollars, it would still come back for a supplemental?
Correct, because
Okay.
those dollars would be returned at that point, so they'd
Okay.
just be sitting in unreserved fund balance.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so like kind of back to operations questions on this item. And I apologize, you might have already said this, but why did we not move forward with this project in 2024?
It didn't move forward in 2024. We were still in the planning phase. So we were unable to actually execute on a quote. I'm very close to having a quote, but I don't have a quote right now that I'm confident in executing on these 3 projects. Actually, and this is one of the reasons I actually left it up there. 825 Tech Center Drive laterals, right? And it says encumbered there. I had enough design information and a good quote in order to encumber those dollars, I did not have enough information and still don't have enough information for trunk 4 capacity improvements. That's the trunk that runs down Morrison Road that connects to 825. And then there's a lot of fiber assets that run into this particular building that also need unraveled. So we're in the planning phase for that, design phase, if you would. It's a little bit different because it's IT stuff, but we're in the planning phase. They're in the process of basically getting me a quote in order to untangle everything that's in the basement of this building that we will need to deprecate when we leave this particular facility. So what will end up happening, you notice that I'm not actually asking even for a reallocation amount in those dollars. The top project is the annual allotment, and you see that by the middle 2 letters YR. That basically means yearly or annual, if you would. Through the CIP Advisory Committee, when I have good quotes for these 2 bottom projects, we'll go to the CIP Advisory Committee and we'll say, I want to take a portion of this 763 and apply it to this project, a portion of the 763 and apply it to the second project, and then whatever's remaining there will remain. If I have other fiber projects that I need to do throughout the year, I'll come and approach the CIP Advisory Committee and inform that this is what it looks like I'm gonna allocate a couple of these dollars to. At the end of the year, if there's any residual in that 763 that isn't unallocated, it will go back to the fund in which it came from. That's how every capital project should be functioning at this particular point in time. Admittedly, we're 1 cycle ahead of ourselves right now, which is good. It increases our transparency to you folks. Honestly, it increases the transparency from the director level up to our level. And then it gives us the ability to be much more transparent with the CIP Advisory Committee and then much more transparent with you folks as to how money is, or what, I should say, how money is being allocated towards some of these projects. In order for me to, if these are the 4 projects that would be approved for 25, let's say I have a 5th project that I want to spin up for 25, I would go to the CIP Advisory Committee and I would say I'm looking to add this particular project to the books. And then through that particular process is when it would get added to the CIP and then become a project, and that's how it's listed or referred to in the actual document itself. If I needed for procurement purposes, if I reached certain thresholds and such, I may have to come back before the board here to the council to, maybe it's a permission to bid situation, maybe it's a contractual situation, but I may end up back here at the city council for final approval as well. So mechanically, it is new, like Director Burry said, like you've indicated. So we're still working through some of those mechanics.
And I guess, thank you, Director. The other sort of question that I have regarding this particular spend at this point is, you've identified sort of the public benefits that we have because of fiber optic infrastructure. There's also, and I think it was touted at its outset as attracting business and being an economic development driver. Am I understanding that correctly?
20 plus years ago, yes.
Okay. Does it still have that value? Does it still have that function or no? Do we just really see this as a public utility for public infrastructure purposes?
No, it still has that utility. It still has that utility. I can go into greater detail on that, but it still has economic development generating capabilities. We in our system have certain constraints that make it more prohibitive for us to use it in that particular fashion, and we're working through some of those issues.
Is it a goal of the administration to make it more private sector type, like capable?
This is the goal of it's the goal of, it should be the goal of the CIC, not necessarily the goal of the city, right? Because it's the CIC who's receiving those particular benefits, and I'm not 100% sure that we can actually sell services, but the CIC can, by agreement. The constraining agreement is not held with us. The constraining agreement is held with the CIC.
I see. So it's not necessarily like any kind of security concern on our end or anything like that that would
No, ma'am.
preclude this from being a benefit to the private sector?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's a benefit to some of the private sector throughout the city of Gahanna at this particular point in time, but it could be, in this day and age, 20 years later, the average business needs different types of services and services that our current partners don't necessarily offer. So therefore, it constrains the resource.
I'm sorry, this is probably like a much bigger conversation than tonight. So maybe we can like set aside some time to go
Sure.
into this in greater detail, but is there newer technology that we should be investing in instead of this fiber optic line?
No. It's not. Fiber is still top notch as far as getting information, data from one place to another. There's a lot of fiber resources. I mean, there's certain neighborhoods up on Hamilton Road where fiber optic is being put in by private providers for cable television and internet service and those types of things. So no, fiber optic is still, despite the fact that it's 20 plus years old, much older than that even, it still has tremendous relevance. It's the paper that restrains us, not the technology.
If we didn't invest this $763,000 in this expansion, what would the alternative be?
You'd be paying a service provider in order to ride on their fiber optic network to the tune of, it's expensive to lease a piece of dark fiber in order for us to get from one building to another building when we have the capability to do it ourselves. Trunk 4 is the example there, right? It's just it's 288 fiber cables, and we're out of capacity on that particular cable, which was why that's the one that runs on Morrison through Tech Center, so on and so forth, in the area in which we need it. So in this particular instance, the capacity of the cable just needs expanded. It's the equivalent of, going from a 12-inch sewer line to a 16-inch sewer line. More connections, more abilities, so on and so forth. There's other projects that we executed and got closed, but like we increased the lateral capacity into 400 West Johnstown because there was no more room on the cable. These projects are necessary in order for us to do, not necessarily how many bullets are up there, 5 bullets. The middle 3 bullets are critical that these 3 projects are done.
Does the district pay a fee?
Yeah, so anybody who rides on our fiber cable, they have an IRU that's been signed and executed by council. Those their connections have increased and have, I shouldn't say increased, their connections have changed over time because of construction projects. The MECs, Mifflin Township's connections have changed over time because of different building projects, so on and so forth. Those agreements need to come back before you folks once routes are finalized and those types of things. So they do pay. Do they pay anywhere close to the capital investment that you see up there? No, absolutely not.
And do those funds route through the CIC for our public partners or just for the private tie-ins?
Just for the private tie-ins.
Okay. And do we have any indication from CIC what their revenue is? I think that they disclose that in their treasurer's report, if I remember correctly.
I only spend the money. I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what the revenue is for the CIC.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
As I'm sitting here, I can't help but notice that we still have with us a couple members of our Citizens Academy that have toughed it out for over 2 hours. So I almost feel like you need a second certificate of completion just for getting through this. Anything further from council with regard to IT capital projects.
I'm sorry, I had one other question regarding the infrastructure.
Yep, yep.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowers?
And I do not have a question about the IT system applications, but just regarding the infrastructure that was identified, the 845,000,
825?
yeah.
Yep.
Was that included in our 825 budget? And
No, so we had there's a couple different you're getting a whole IT lesson tonight. There's a couple different classes of switches. There's what we refer to as, or the IT world more appropriately refers to as, a core switch. The core switches in this particular building were set to be refreshed in 2024, and we specifically held that project for implementation down at 825. There have been some increased switching demands down at 825. One of the owner provided items, but vendor installed. So we need to give to Alfred as the contractor to install is the Wi-Fi units that go in the ceiling. They, in that particular instance, preferred that we purchase them and give them to them because they don't want to be in the world of IT specs, so on and so forth. Excuse me. So that's also included in the $825,000 is Wi-Fi units and those and a couple of other things.
help me articulate the reason why this would not be reflected in like an 825 overview budget.
The core switch. The core switch would never have been capitalized in that particular fashion on a construction project, because that's not considered building startup cost necessarily. That's something that we would have required. We have one now as an example, right? And it needed upfitted. There are some access layer switches that were unaccounted for in the 825 budget. Could that's the second need there on the networking side. They still meet the capital definition, so on and so forth. I think in part, well, no, not in part. We were told at some particular point in time, the level of sophistication inside of that building, there's really three different networks in that building. There's an audio video network, there's a security network for access controls, detention systems, so on and so forth, and then there's the regular IT network. I think there was a little bit of confusion between us and the technology engineer. And they did provide switching for the security network and the AV network, but they did not provide switching for the building network itself. So that was oh, you guys have that? Oh, you guys have that? And then we have it here. I think what we're actually getting as part of this particular project and this particular weight at this particular point is a core switch and access layer switching that are one system and not two systems. So I think in the end we're actually getting a better implementation down at 825 than we would have if they had the access layer switches and we had the core switch.
Just for purposes of thank you so much.
Sure.
Just for purposes of kind of a holistic overview of budget, would you please make sure that the core switches
100%.
are included in those final 825 numbers?
Sorry, I'm not trying to correct you.
No, it's okay.
The access layer switch is not the core switch.
Access layer
Yes.
switch is the one of the three that weren't included.
Correct. The
Okay.
Wi-Fi units will be included when we do like final project closeout and we're
Yep.
before you guys and we're saying this is what we spent total,
Yep.
so on and so forth. The access layer switches and the Wi-Fi units will be in here. I will note, and I think this is important for the record of that entire budget at this particular point in time, these are seemingly the only two items that we've actually, we thought they had them, they thought we had them, and there was a miss.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
Mrs. McGregor?
This is not, I just think it's real interesting that you were able to bring up, make this 825,000 with 825 Tech Center Drive.
That was strictly an accident. I noticed that when I was putting the numbers together
I
myself.
thought that was real special.
Anything further from council regarding IT capital? I want to dial the lens out just a little bit, just trying to anticipate questions that we might receive. With regard to page 115 that lists all of the department's capital improvements, there's, just out of the capital improvement fund, right now, and I understand this is subject to correction, but $11.94 million. With this returning and reallocation, the ordinance that will be asked to pass will be something different
Correct.
larger than that number, correct?
Potentially. Like I said, we're leaning towards the first quarter of bringing those reallocations back as a supplemental, just so we have more time, one, to make sure that the process that we're coming up with works.
Okay.
And second, because we still have a whole quarter, well, 2 months at this point, kind of lost October. So we have 2 months where we could still get some proposals, some quotes. So we don't want to return stuff prematurely if we don't have to. If we could finish the procurement process, we could ask for those dollars or get those dollars on encumbrances and not have to reallocate them.
Okay.
So the more and more we talk about the process, the more we want to be careful to avoid asking for dollars twice and go through the process. And we're leaning more towards coming back in the first quarter and saying, you know, with that CIP, that first quarter, saying, well, here's everything that didn't have enough to go through the procurement process that we've returned. We're now asking for a supplemental appropriation for it. And I think that'll be less confusing too with adopting the 2025 budget, because you have that in front of you to then layer on, well, here's the projects that you're approving for 2025, and here's this big amendment that we're coming forth with, which is everything that we couldn't get to in 2024 for whatever reason. So we're thinking it'll be a cleaner break that way. But again, we're also open to your suggestions and what works good for council also.
So taking that thought, again, of anticipating future questions at either your Q1 or Q2 update, there's usually, here's the original budget, and then here's the amended budget. There would be, under that scenario, there'd be a fairly sizable delta, at least with regard to capital, correct?
I don't know a sizable delta.
We're still analyzing
Yeah.
it, and I don't think it's going to be a huge reallocation request, to be honest.
You also have to remember too, like your fund balance is going to go up.
Right.
So you're like in my instance where I returned the $360,000 in the fiber money, that went back to the fund balance, and it's not gonna, and I'm not asking for that. It's not a one-to-one ask, right? Yeah, if there was an ask for an increase, right, in 25, you would see just the delta of the increase in the 25 money, so that money would also be in there. We have to be, mechanically, we have to be a little bit careful, because we also don't want to slow down the process where all of a sudden now I need to wait for January and I need to wait for 2 readings and all that other jazz in order for a project to, so when we know a project is not like the fiber projects and the switch projects, we know that they weren't going to hit, so return it now and just ask for that reallocation so that we can get it in the works. I think where there are some departments and other projects that are a little bit more complicated, Parks and Rec or engineering are probably the 2 areas where you would see this reallocation part and piece play itself back out. But I know from an equipment standpoint, I know from a fleet standpoint, a public service capital standpoint, public safety is the same way. I think they're all in good shape where there's not a lot of this reallocation type concept that needs to go. It's really Parks and Rec and it's really engineering where there's this interplay between old money and quote unquote new money.
Sure. Okay.
And we are trying to get a better handle on exactly what that means.
Understood. Anything further from council regarding tonight's topic of human resources, information technology, the finance department, or mayor's court? Anything that we didn't cover? Lingering questions or concerns? All right, so next week is Parks and Rec, I believe. That is both ops and capital. Capital can be found on 115 of your budget book. Do we like this process with the presentation and the slide deck, or do we prefer, I guess, what we had done in the past where we kind of go line by line with the questions? You want to continue this next week, or Ms. Padova?
Since we are giving the questions in advance and giving them an opportunity to work those or the answers to the questions into the slide deck, I think that works well. Then we can also gives them a chance to kind of like give us more context to just this book and maybe answer some of the, I guess, any additional questions that we might think of, give us a little bit more clarity before we start just throwing questions
Definitely more context, I would agree with
Yeah,
that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Anybody else? Everybody kind of concur with that? All right. So I guess we'll anticipate the same modus operandi next week.
And I'll just plan, if there are questions from this department that pop back up, or some general questions about revenue expenditures, I'll just continue to put those at the top.
Okay, that works. Colleagues, Thursday is trick or treat, so I'll be a bit abbreviated on time. If we could have the questions to me 9 PM Wednesday, is that amenable to everybody?
By when?
9 PM on Wednesday? Just Parks and Rec, both Ops and Capital. All good? All right, thanks, everyone. Thus concludes finance.
Thank you.